All right, so let's talk about domain and range. Really important terms. So let's first look at their definition. So domain, input values of x. So domain doesn't have to be x, but a lot of times it is x. Um, Another way to think about domain is it's the set of all real numbers where the relation is defined. That's really important to think about, especially when we are looking at the actual equation. So domain, possible inputs is sometimes where I think it's a good way to think about it. What could I put as an input where it would be defined, where I could get an answer? So graphically, we read from left to right. Okay, so if, my graph is a horizontal line, my domain goes all the way from the left to the right, or negative infinity to positive infinity, all real numbers. Analytically, so when we think of it analytically, we want to think about what x values don't work. So, like I have this function here, f of x equals 1 over the quantity of x plus 1. So if I'm looking at this, I have to think about, okay, well, what couldn't I plug in for x here? I mean, if I think about randomly, the number 7, it's my college volleyball number. If I plug in 7 here, I would get 1/8. And that's good, right? That's an actual number. So what number can't I plug in for x? Well, remember, we can't divide by 0, right? So in other words, we know that if I plugged in -1 for x here, this would become undefined. So its domain, D for domain, is going to be everything except for -1. And you can kind of think of that intuitively. This says here, -infinity to -1, union -1 to infinity. Or in other words, everything but -1. Just another case I want to mention, we know that we can't divide by 0, so when we have rationals, that's a good thing to keep in mind. Also, if we have an even root, like a square root or a fourth root, and so on, I can't have an even root of a negative number, right? Because then we would get imaginary numbers, and that's not real. We need real numbers for our domain. So just something to keep in mind there. Now, range, when we think about range, we should think about output. Okay, so output values, usually it's y, it's our dependent variable. Just keep in mind that we read this from bottom to top on a graph, right? So think what's the lowest y value that we could have up to the highest. And just something to keep in mind here with that is, use common sense too. When I'm thinking about, for example, some applications like time, we can't have negative times. So all those negative numbers wouldn't be part of my range. Or if I'm thinking about height, same thing. I'm not going to have negative height. So it is possible to use common sense to think about both your domain and range.